The desert had a way of swallowing things: sound, distance, doubt. They all vanished into the yellow furnace of sand and sky. You didn't realize it was happening until there was nothing left to measure yourself against. No trees, no hills, no curves in the land, just heat shimmer and flat-line horizon. When I stepped out of the transport van, the air met my skin like a blade, dry, oxygen-thin, and sharp, with the scent of sunburned metal and something more acrid. Ozone and coolant, maybe. The soles of my boots hit cracked tarmac, and for a moment I stood there in the empty surface lot of Telemetry Station 47B, letting the heat knead into old injuries I'd stopped bothering to name. Above me, telemetry towers reached like skeletal fingers toward a sky scrubbed clean of satellites. A show, nothing more. Shells of an official story long abandoned. The towers didn't transmit. They pointed to keep up appearances. Their shadows didn't stretch far in this kind of sun. Telemetry Station 47B was supposed to be a research outpost for low-priority atmospheric scans. NASA technically still owned it. A dumping ground for broken careers and inconvenient minds. That's what the file said. The truth was deeper. This was Orion's Signals, not a name you'd find in any organizational chart, not even in the black budgets unless you knew where to dig. It was a place where strange signals were intercepted and rendered inert, a terminus for thoughts too malformed to survive the trip into human understanding. A vacuum trap for whispers from places that shouldn't have had a voice at all. I had been invited, no, conscripted, dragged from the wreckage of my academic life like a half-dead man pulled from the surf. I'd once dared to suggest that the oceans might think, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but truly. Distributed cognition forming across vast ecosystems under pressure and time. My theories cost me everything. My funding, my position, my name. Now they wanted me to listen again. Only this time the voice wasn't coming from Earth. The security gate shrieked as it opened, metal joints grinding through rust and age. A guard in full black utilities waved me forward with a short, practiced gesture. No words, no expression. Just the soft hum of active signal-dampening equipment buckled to their belt. The heat pressed down like a second gravity as I crossed the compound toward the prefab administrative shack. Every step seemed to draw the rhythm out of the ground. Boot on concrete, sand whispering against the siding, wind pushing softly against the building's false skin. Beneath it all, just at the edge of sound, I heard something else. A soft, wet murmur where no water could possibly be. I stopped mid-stride and tilted my head. Nothing, only wind. The desert was cruel that way, offering echoes of things you'd lost and never quite found again. Inside the admin shack, the temperature dropped sharply, but the air wasn't cleaner. It had the metallic flatness of artificial systems running too long. Machines cycled oxygen. The smell of human spaces pretending to be sterile. The technician waiting inside was younger than I expected, fidgeting slightly, coveralls neat and stiff, eyes too bright. The Orion patch was visible on her shoulder, a black circle split by a jagged silver line. "Dr. Avery?" she asked, voice clipped. "That is correct. They're expecting you. This way." No handshake, no welcome, just motion. Efficient and nervous, like someone handling a live warhead. I followed her through a narrow corridor, the floor sloping ever so slightly downward. Most wouldn't notice. I did. A lifetime of reading terrain and pressure shifts made it obvious. We were going underground. Every 20 feet, a crank jutted from the wall beside a mechanical bulkhead. Manual overrides, analog fail-safes in case the automated systems failed, or were compromised. I didn't like the implication. Neither did the back of my neck. She left me at a reinforced security door, guarded by 2 personnel in heavier Orion gear. Full suits, reflective visors, signal inhibitors clipped at the hip. They scanned my ID, glanced at each other, then opened the door without a word. Chief Langford waited inside. He looked like the desert had grown a body, square-cut, tense, his fatigues black, spotless, his posture harder than the concrete walls. He didn't offer a chair, only a long stare that scraped across my record like a knife on old bone. "Dr. Daniel Avery," he said finally, "formerly of NOAA Institute, then UW Marine Sciences, specialist in extremophile biomes, theories on distributed cognitive systems in deep ocean environments." A recitation, not praise, not condemnation, just facts. A wound reopened and held in light. "Yes," I said. "You've read my obituary." Langford's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more like a calibration. "We brought you in because we have a problem." He stepped aside, letting me see the primary monitor. Atmospheric spectrographs. Nothing special at first glance, just absorption lines, chemical balances, methane, CO2, trace metals. But something else lay over the data, ghosting through the noise. A pulse, a rhythm. Recursive, layered, biological. K218b, Langford said. 120 light years out. We didn't just find biosignatures. We found this. He tapped the monitor. The pattern shifted like it was breathing. We dismissed it at first, processing error, artifact noise. Then our techs started hearing things, clicks, patterns, dreams. The word hung in the room like a suspended charge. "You think it's alive?" I asked. Langford didn't blink. "We think it's signaling, and it might not be alone." I stared at the waveform as it wound through the monitor like a coiling serpent. "And you want me to tell you if it's conscious?" He shook his head. "No. We want you to tell us if it's a threat, and if it is, how to kill the signal before it kills us." Behind him, another door slid open. Beyond it, another corridor, deeper and darker, lined with redundant systems and warning signs. "Dr. Greaves is waiting in analysis too," Langford said. "You'll be working together. No solo access, no unfiltered exposure, full psych monitoring in effect." "And if the signal adapts?" I asked. Langford looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw the weight behind his eyes. A man who had already fought something he couldn't explain. "Then you'll understand why Orion Signals exists." As the heavy door unlocked with a mechanical clunk, the technician glanced at me once, pale and silent. Then she vanished into the administrative dark. I stepped through alone. Just before the door sealed, I caught a trace of salt on the air. Not the dry taste of artificial scrubbers, but ocean salt, cold and deep and alive. I hesitated, because I had heard that sound before, on the day the sea took my brother Nathan, smiling and waving from the rocks as the rogue wave rose behind him. And then he was gone. No scream, no trace. Now I stood again at the edge of something vast and pulling, and this time the ocean had spoken first. The descent into the lower levels of Orion Signals was quiet, but never silent. The deeper you went, the more the structure itself seemed to breathe. Fans murmured through the walls like distant waves, pipes ticked and expanded with thermal fatigue. Beneath all of it, something else, a subtle, persistent rhythm you couldn't quite locate, but felt in your jaw, in your spine, like your own pulse had fallen out of sync with the world. I followed the corridor down, the lights overhead softening the deeper we moved. Beige paint gave way to exposed steel, then to reinforced polymer walls embedded with analog controls, manual backups designed to survive EMPs, data breaches, and apparently signals that could think. Each door had redundancies, mechanical latches, cranks, fail-safes for fail-safes. I arrived at Analysis 2 alone. The door accepted my credentials, sliding open with reluctant hydraulics. Inside, the temperature dropped another degree. Low ceilings, narrow sight lines, shadows clustering in corners they had no business being in. A workspace assembled with brutal, focused intent. No softness, no comfort. Just racks of equipment, a workbench littered with recursive flowcharts and worn graph paper, and in the middle of it all, Dr. Anton Greaves. He didn't look up as I entered, just muttered, "You're late," and kept working, stylus in hand, eyes flicking between monitors. The man radiated sleeplessness, jittery and lean, too many thoughts firing too fast to rest. I stepped beside him and saw it for the first time. The signal. It moved across the primary screen like breath through black water. Not static, not noise. Something organized. It bent itself into the data, looping around atmospheric chemical readouts from K2-18b, nesting, embedding. It was hiding inside patterns that didn't belong to it. I didn't speak. I could feel it, not understanding yet, but recognizing. The way you recognize a voice you haven't heard in years. My mouth tasted of salt. My fingertips ached. Greaves passed me a stylus and a clean sheet of graph paper, the corners already beading with moisture. "Map what you see," he said. "Not what you think you see." I sat, drew. The shapes came easily, spirals within spirals, bloom structures like the ones I'd seen clinging to deep-sea vents. But these weren't random. They pulsed. They waited. My hand moved without conscious effort. "It's fractal," Greaves said, "but not mathematical, biological, coastlines folding into themselves, recursive tidal thinking." I nodded slowly. I'd seen similar shapes in nature, but nothing this coherent, nothing so precise and alive. We watched as the signal drifted, folded, and repeated itself. A loop, but one that learned. It wasn't just a message, it was a mind adapting to the act of being perceived. Greaves adjusted the signal filters. A low clicking filled the room. At first, arrhythmic, then stabilizing into something slower. A kind of breathing. Not organic, not mechanical, but patterned. I felt something open in my memory, not knowledge, something deeper. The same tide I'd felt in the desert. A rhythm that hadn't left since I stepped inside. Greaves whispered, "It hears us hearing it." I turned to him. He looked pale, eyes glassy. "Say that again." He tapped the side of his head. "It knows we're listening. It's adapting." A chime sounded, a soft triple tone, psychotronic signal event detected. I reached to mute it out of reflex, but Greaves caught my wrist, gripped like steel. "Not yet. Listen." The clicks shifted again, faster, no longer passive. They were becoming structured, like language without words. A cadence, another alarm. Greaves relented and thumbed the dampener. The sound vanished. The signal didn't. We sat for a long time, breathing in sync with something that wasn't there. My hand still moved across the paper. A spiral collapsing into itself, the center bleeding into nothing. Hours passed unnoticed. We worked as if underwater, phrases cut short, silences that felt heavier than words. I checked my neural baseline. Normal. But I didn't feel normal. The room began to warp subtly. Peripheral shadows flexed with the signal's breath. I stepped out under the excuse of retrieving more data. I needed grounding. Needed to remember what was real. The corridor outside was wrong, narrower than before. Lights dimmed to a sickly yellow, and the walls sweating, moisture beading at the seams. Senior technician Wallace Garron was kneeling by an access panel, tapping the walls with a rubber mallet. He worked slow, deliberate, muttering to himself. He looked up when I approached. "Evening, Doc." "You say the walls are sweating?" He tapped the seam again, pulled his hand back. Moisture clung to his fingertips. "Ain't supposed to happen," he said. "System should be bone dry." "And it's not a leak?" "Hope it is," he muttered. "Otherwise, it's coming from somewhere it shouldn't." I left him to his tapping, those soft impacts following me down the hall like sonar pings. When I re-entered Analysis 2, Greaves was bent over the console, arms locked, breathing hard. "You're hearing it now," I said. He didn't look up. And dreaming, he showed me his notebook. Between the normal signal breakdowns and code clusters were new shapes, fluid, vascular, things trying to become maps, trying to become real. "We have to log this," I said. "Standard contamination protocol." "You think a form's going to stop this?" His voice was shaking. "The signal's not in the air. It's in the structure. It's everywhere." As if to prove his point, a low rumble passed beneath our feet. Not mechanical, not seismic, just pressure, something too large exhaling in its sleep. Then the calm cracked once, not a proper signal, just a fragment, a voice not made for ears whispering a single word. "Welcome." I turned to the monitors. No input, no contact logged, nothing to account for the sound. We initiated Level 2 lockdown of the analysis wing, sealed the bulkheads, activated the psych filters. It wouldn't hold, we knew that. But procedure was better than panic. Later, in my quarters, I tried to speak a field note. Voice command failed. The mic refused to engage. Manual input only, another layer of defense against psychotronic seepage. I whispered the truth into the recorder. The signal is not stochastic. It is recursive, mimetic, and resonant. It's not a message. It's a presence. We're not observing from afar. We're inside its influence already. The dreams came 2 days later. Quiet at first, unremarkable, but wrong. The sea without sky. A bay I didn't know. Water smooth like oil, and beneath it, something massive, waiting just below the threshold of recognition. Each time I woke, the taste of salt lingered in my throat. Not memory, residue. Graves stopped sleeping entirely. His sketches broke down, spirals fracturing into fungal veins crawling toward the page margins. Something inside him was reaching out, looking for more space. The signal wasn't content with being heard. It wanted to be known. The world didn't end. It tilted, slightly, quietly, just enough to knock the edges off everything familiar. And that was enough. Weeks after Orion signals died in the sand, I sat alone on the back porch of a government-issued safe house somewhere along the fractured coast of Washington state. The sea stretched out below me, endless and slow and wrong, a strip of gray-green water that shimmered with the oily iridescence of old gasoline. Beautiful if you didn't know what it meant, poison if you did. I watched the tides crawl farther inland each day. I watched the light bend differently, as if the sky above had thickened. On television, muted news anchors with brittle smiles explained it all away. Accelerated blooms, runoff, climate extremes. A few careful nods to melting ice shelves and rogue currents. No mention of what we'd done, or what we'd met. The agency sent a minder. Didn't introduce himself, didn't need to. Field jacket, quiet boots, a file folder heavier than its paper should have allowed. He handed it to me and turned back to his vehicle without a word. I didn't call after him. Inside, drift reports from coastal towns, sleep anomalies, spectral inconsistencies in oxygenation, behavior changes in marine species. The ocean was adjusting, not in resistance, in response. A few months ago, we had poisoned a god, told it, in the only language it recognized, that Earth was broken, unfit, contaminated, and for now it had moved on. But the signal didn't die. It couldn't. It had never been sound. It had been shape, pattern, carried in chemistry, in water, in thought, carried in us. I passed every cognitive assessment, perfect scores, stable syntax, linear recall. no loss of affect. But sometimes I reached for words that didn't exist. Sometimes I dreamed in recursive loops of impossible coastlines, beaches that stretched forever under starless skies, each tide pulling memories instead of sand. I would wake gasping, the taste of salt clinging to the back of my tongue, as if I had swallowed the ocean all over again. I was never afraid. That was the worst part. Fear is for things you can name. You can run from fear. This was recognition. A quiet understanding that nothing had ever been ours to begin with. That we had mistaken occupancy for ownership. That the sea had merely been sleeping. Now it dreamed again. Some nights when the wind dropped low and the only sound was the slow breath of surf breaking below the cliff. I would hear it. Not the original signal, no. That was gone. This was softer. A memory of a memory. The rhythm still lived inside me like it had rewired my heartbeat. Greaves had been the one to carry the poison, to burn himself into the signal and bleed entropy back across the void. I remembered the look in his eyes before we closed the helmet. He'd already heard Nathan's name, already seen that ocean. He never asked for forgiveness. He just said, "Better me than the oceans." And he was right. But damage doesn't undo itself. It lingers. It grows edges. The blooms kept spreading. The fish stopped migrating. Some species stopped dying altogether. Something deep in the genetic rootstock was shifting. We hadn't shut the door. We just slammed it hard enough to rattle the frame and hoped the thing on the other side decided to go knock somewhere else. My hands were steady. My thoughts mostly clear. But I knew. Deep down, where the salt had settled in the marrow, I knew. We weren't the top of anything. We were a pause, a breath, a chapter in a longer story written in brine and time. Orion had delayed what was coming, maybe by decades, maybe by centuries, maybe longer if we were lucky or if it forgot we were here. But one day it would look back, not out of hatred or vengeance, out of curiosity. It would wonder if we had grown into something useful, something it could fold into itself. The screen door rattled behind me in the wind. Inside, the television glowed with soft footage of another beach choked in white foam. "Localized algal overproduction," the banner read. No one questioned it. They never would. That was what humanity excelled at, not fighting monsters, not conquering the dark, but forgetting. I stayed outside. The wind bit through my jacket, pulled at my skin like fingers. The sky overhead was colorless, ash filtering light until there was no difference between day and dusk. Just a gray fade, as if the world had started erasing itself from the edges inward. I thought of Greaves, of Nathan, of Langford standing in his last suit of armor, broadcasting entropy into a dreaming mind. I thought of all of us, clawing for meaning inside a system that had never known we existed until we dared to speak. And I thought of the whisper, that word still echoing beneath everything. Welcome, not a threat, not a warning, an invitation. I stood and walked to the edge of the bluff, the sea stretching out beneath me like a sleeping animal. The waves moved in slow, perfect recursion. No randomness, just memory in motion. I closed my eyes, let the salt wind burn across my face, felt the world shift a fraction beneath me, and whispered the only truth I had left. Sleep a little longer. Then I turned from the cliff and the ocean and everything it carried, not because I believed we were safe, but because I knew now. Tides are not meant to be fought. They are meant to be endured.